Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm chilly. You get a hood and a table full of knives. Welcome back to the 4,000 Question Challenge, episode 259. These are two-part questions. So the first part is, what was the worst? And then there's a follow-up section after that. It's a whole page of these things. So it's actually going to be at least partially three videos on just these questions. We've done one already. This is the second one. What was the worst book you ever read? Well, I don't read bad books. So if I get to a certain part in a book and I realize it's a bad book, it gets donated. In one case, I actually went to throw a book out. My wife wouldn't let me. She actually made me donate it to some bin somewhere. That was a horrible book dealing with why male children have violent tendencies. And it was horrible. But the worst book when I think of worst books, it comes to mind was a biography of Dean Martin, where the author was a frustrated novelist who actually went on to write a novel for real at some point. So he really was a frustrated novelist, and he really wanted to write this 30s style Mickey Spillane kind of story, and you could feel it in the way he was writing Dean Martin's life. And he got to a certain part in the book, I believe it was on page 38, if I remember. Oh, no, it was 88. It might have been 88. There was an 8 in there. I know that. And he referred to women that had been sexually trafficked into being essentially sex slaves for the mob. He referred to them as dumb meat. He wasn't talking from the point of view of a gangster or anything like that. No. This was the author calling trafficked women dumb meat. Yeah, I stopped reading at that point. What was the worst investment you have ever made? Well, I bought some pieces of gear over the years that turned out to be absolute flops, and I've double purchased books and movies by mistake. Biggest thing? Worst investment? Yeah, probably some kind of gear. I can't really off the top of my head. I own a lot of machetes I've never used, but I think they're cool, so I don't know if that's a bad investment or not. What was the worst family trip you have ever been on? I mentioned this in the past, but my family in 1976, I believe it was, drove from New Hampshire to Florida and back in a little compact station wagon with vinyl seats. That was horrible in the summer. What was the worst movie ever made? I know there's some bad ones out there, but my high water mark for a bad movie is Showgirls. And the reason I say that is that the film is about beautiful, naked women. And it is still unwatchable. You could have just had no sound and it would have been better. You're better off watching it that way, because there are some really attractive humans in this. But the movie is so bad. The plot, the dialogue, the delivery, the act, it's horrible. I would love to find a copy of that with a commentary track. That'd be awesome. What was the worst sexual experience in your life? Why the hell are you going to ask that question to somebody? What if you ask a rape survivor that question? Fuck that noise. Wow. What was the worst New Year's Eve you have ever had? I had a lot of boring New Year's Eve, so I can't say it was worst. I never did anything spectacularly bad on New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve has never been a big thing for me. What was the worst date you were ever on? I don't really date. I would just get to know somebody, and eventually we started hanging out, and eventually we decided that we were interested in each other. So there weren't dates, so I went on a fishing trip with somebody on a blind date. That wasn't great, but I guess maybe that's the worst one. What was the worst holiday of your life? I've had some pretty bad depressed holidays, so some really severely depressed holidays, so maybe one of those. What was the worst thing that ever happened to you in an elevator? Nothing? I like elevators. I think they're cool. What was the worst home you have ever lived in? Worst home. Every home had its ups and downs. Probably my first time I lived in a house with my mother's second husband, who was a drunk and a smoker and violent. So yeah, maybe that was the worst. Maybe that was the worst house, but it had more to do with the company than the building. So thank you for being here today for the episode 259 of the 4,000 Question Challenge, and I hope that you're here for episode 260.